Will the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Outman.
Here.
Representatives Alexander.
Here.
Carra.
Here.
Bruck.
Present.
Kunse.
Here.
Nyer.
Here.
Preston.
Yep.
Bonak.
Here.
Frisbie.
Here.
Wertz. Here. Hersberg.
Here.
Cope. Here. Colazar.
Here.
Andrews.
Here.
Grant. Here. Miller. Here. Wilson.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 17 members present. You do have a quorum.
Representative Hersberg moves to adopt the minutes of the March 4th meeting. There being no objection, the meetings are adopted. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee meeting. We have an exciting agenda before you today as we take testimony for the first time on our 8-bill road funding plan, a plan that's going to redirect $3 billion to fix Michigan roads without raising taxes. As chair of this committee, this is my number one priority and something that's been in the works for quite some time now, so I'm really eager to get to work on this. But before we dive into that plan, we'll start with a presentation from MDOT Director Brad Reifert on the current state of our transportation infrastructure. Director, whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, representatives. Appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon and talk to you a little bit about the Department of Transportation. Not going to dig into the weeds very much on anything. This is kind of an MDOT 101, just to give you a flavor for the types of things that the department does and some of our industry partners that we work with. I do want to point out on this cover slide our mission there. And I'll tell you, as someone, I'm a civil engineer. I've been with the department for almost 30 years. We were very focused in the past on the infrastructure. You know, we wanted good roads, good bridges. We still do, obviously. But we've taken a little bit of a paradigm shift in that we're really thinking about how our transportation system is used and making sure that we're looking for the most positive incomes. I can have the smoothest road and the most structurally sound bridge, but if it doesn't help people, communities, or the economy, what are we doing? So we really want to make that the kind of the North Star for us. Everything we do needs to serve people, communities, and the economy. You're not going to be able to read all this, I realize, and perhaps it can be a good takeaway, but it's just kind of the breadth of what all is included in the department. We do have an aeronautics commission. We have a state transportation commission that helps with policy. But, just talking left to right, we have an administrative area that deals with administrative things, finance administration, enterprise information management, which is really our data management and IT support type of folks, along with the international bridge, and then our modes. We call them our modes. Obviously, we're roads and bridges, but we're also passenger transportation, we're also aeronautics, and we're also rail. We also have an area that houses a lot of our planning and workforce and economic development folks. We do have our own Office of Economic Development that really focuses on trying to help, especially local agencies, fund projects that can promote the economy in their area. I will say that we have established recently an Office of Public Affairs. And what I've been trying to do with that group is really align our policy and our governmental affairs along with communications. Not that we were too disjointed in the past, but I wanted to be very intentional because policy and legislative affairs obviously go hand in hand, but it's important to think about how we talk about those things to the public and how we're communicating. Operationally, on the right side, we have folks that deal with development, construction, maintenance, and whatnot. And especially on the right side, especially for the representatives, I'd love it if you guys could get to know what we call our region engineers. We have 7 regions in our state. And these are the folks that really direct the staff that are out in the field where the rubber meets the road. These are the people doing the maintenance. These are the people doing the construction inspection and permitting and traffic safety issues. So we can talk more about that, but I think there's great value in building relationships, and it's a big point for me, for these folks, to get out and meet you all as well. So I talked about people, communities, and the economy. These are just some quick stats for you. You know, a third of all trade with Canada does come through Michigan. You can see that the dollar amounts that, you know, nearly 100 or more than $900 billion of freight moved on the highways and rail and air and in the ports. Trucking does count for a very large share of that, obviously, and then just some general numbers for you on tourism. So obviously we realize that, you know, there's a lot of tourist attractions around the state, and it's important that we have a healthy transportation system collectively in the state to support all of that. I did mention multimodal a little bit before. We do have public transportation rules along with air, marine, and rail. I think I'm going to go into a few of those here in a little bit. There'll be a little bit more detail on subsequent slides. This is just to give you, again, the order of magnitude of what the transportation system looks like in the state of Michigan, with over 120,000 miles of roadway, over 11,000 bridges. And that's spread across more than 600 jurisdictions. Obviously, there's one MDOT. We have the trunk line system. We work with 83 of our county road professionals and agencies, along with 531 municipal jurisdictions. This information largely comes from the Transportation Asset Management Council, which I used to be a part of. And it's actually a really great entity because it's the one council, it's the one area where we all come together and talk about important things to our transportation system and how we can most effectively coordinate and manage those. So I talk a lot with folks about, you know, the transportation system. You probably don't care, and I'm sure your constituents don't care whose road you're on, whether it's a county road, a city road, or a state highway. They want all roads to be in good condition. It is a system. I live on a county road. I drive on a trunk line to get to the city of Lansing. I take city of Lansing streets to my office, so they're all important. And again, these are just more stats. So, you know, MDOT specifically, yeah, we have about 8% of the entire system. That being the trunk line system does carry more than 3/4 of all of the commercial traffic. So think big trucks. And really on that 8%, we carry more than half of all vehicular miles traveled in the state. So it's a small piece, but obviously it's a very important piece. I think importance of the road perspective probably depends on your own perspective in the roads you drive. That's why I'm saying from a department perspective, it's the entire system, not just the trunk lines. It's the county roads, it's the city roads that are important to all of us. For the trunk line specifically, out of that, there is over 9,000 miles and over almost 5,000 bridges. We do still operate several roadside parks on the non-freeway system and 77 rest areas. And again, we are responsible for planning, design, construction, operations, maintenance, permitting. Should probably say traffic safety and operations in there as well. I'll tell you that the lion's share of our work is low bid. You know, we prepare a set of plans and specifications. We have pre-qualified contractors that then bid on those. So that's primarily how we do things. We have a few other innovative contracting methods we could dive deeper into lately with design build. We have a new one, progressive design build, that we're using on a few projects that does take a little bit more of the qualifications of a team into consideration, but lion's share, we're a low bid environment for our work. We do get asked a lot about how much work do you guys do in-house from an engineering perspective. These are the latest numbers that we have. It says completed in 2020. I'm sure we have more updated numbers than that, I just realized. But it's it's roughly 50-50, maybe a little bit more on the design side, where we actually consult that out. We have never necessarily wanted to be an agency that we do everything in-house. I think it's important as a department that we do enough of that work in-house, that we maintain our core competencies. But then by working with our consulting partner industry, we can kind of balance the kind of the ebb and flows over the years on the amount of resources actually needed in any given year. But we do have a really good relationship with our Michigan ACEC folks, and they're a great partner with us in delivering our program. So talking about from a maintenance standpoint, and parts of this I wish I knew the history on and why it developed this way, but there are 31 counties there that you see in white that are direct forces. MDOT has garages in those counties. We have our own equipment in those counties, and they service just the trunk line system. In 60 other counties, we have contracts with our road agency, our county road agency partners, along with several municipalities. They actually perform the work under contract with us. It's essentially a no-cost contract that we try to make sure that we're being fair with the compensations, but that just eliminates the need for redundancy in a lot of these counties. So obviously, we work very closely on how we manage that work that goes on across the state. There are a few instances of where we've done some private maintenance. The city of Pontiac, we've done a little bit. In Detroit, we were having so many issues with our freeway lighting, we created this P3, public-private partnership, to get that work done, and that's been extremely successful over the last few years. I-75 was the work in Oakland County where we actually have another public-private partnership working with one of our contractor teams on not only designing and constructing the roadway, but actually helping with operations and maintenance going forward, along with many of the other specialty services there that you see as well. Borders and big bridges. It's very interesting to see how these all evolve differently. The international bridge is kind of under the Department of Transportation, but really reports to an international authority of Canadian and U.S. Michigan officials. You're familiar with the Ambassador Bridge, which is probably the only privately owned international crossing that certainly we have in the U.S., but obviously we work closely with those folks as well. The Mackinac Bridge has its own authority as well, yet their employees are actually civil servants. So from an employee perspective, they're MDOT employees, but the bridge itself really reports to the Mackinac Bridge Authority. We have the Detroit-Windsor Tunnel. That's actually the Michigan half is owned by the city of Detroit, privately operated as well. We have the Blue Water, which is kind of split right down the middle. It's owned half by the U.S. and half by Canada, and we have staff that own and operate that one. And then, of course, we have the Gordie Howe Bridge, which hopefully about 6 months from now we can cut a ribbon on with that. That has obviously been done with Canadian resources. We've been there and been helpful on all of our pieces, but we've been reimbursed for all of the work that we've done on that. There is a Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority, and they'll hold the contract for the entity that actually operates and maintains that facility. Active transportation is a term I don't know a lot of people think about it, but it is very important. It's really the non-motorized piece. It's the pedestrians, it's the bicycles, it's whatever form of non-motorized transportation you can think of. Like it says here, we have 60 miles of bike lanes, thousands of miles of paved shoulders, and within the last few years actually established U.S. bicycle routes across the state. I will say another thing about active transportation, we try very hard when we're developing projects to use a complete streets approach. We want to make sure that when we're coming to do even a simple resurfacing or rehabilitation, and more importantly, a reconstruct, that we're considering all users that are using our transportation system in the right of way. We want to make sure that there's safe pedestrian movements. We want to make sure that there's operational, bike lanes where they're needed. So along with along with complete streets, we also try to be sensitive to the context. Doesn't mean we want to build bike paths everywhere. Doesn't mean we have to build these non-motorized paths everywhere. But we need to make sure that when we are doing work, we're considering those users and we can work with locals, we can work with anybody to try to leverage resources to get those in place. Passenger transportation, we have what's called OPT, the Office of Passenger Transportation. We do not own or operate any transit services, but we do work with operating assistance, which is part of Act 51, some of the grant administration pieces, a lot of the safety and regulatory oversight pieces, especially with federal aid that comes through us. So again, we're not an owner-operator, but we are kind of a coordinator, a facilitator, and really an entity that provides regulatory oversight. And you're probably going to see a little bit of a pattern here with all of the different modes. Very similar with aviation. We do have an Office of Aeronautics, and they are responsible for working with airports on planning and development. We have some inspection pieces that we work with. We also are working on integration of uncrewed aerial systems, so drones. We're working very closely excuse me, with other departments in the state as well on how these uncrewed aerial systems can be employed. There is a lot of innovation going on around these pieces. There's a lot of unknowns, a lot of probably regulations, maybe legislation that might need to be considered, but we would like being part of that conversation and coordinating these things across the state. Marine transportation, we do have a small Office of Maritime. Again, there's several ports here that handle many tons of freight at high dollar values, as well as the public passenger ferries and the Soo locks. Again, we don't own any of these, but we have that administrative and safety and regulatory oversight assistance. Rail's been an interesting one for me because even though I've been with the department as long as I have, I hadn't been as indoctrinated into, but to understand how we work with our rail system. There is quite a bit of state-owned system, including some of the high-speed stuff between Kalamazoo and Dearborn. But again, we don't operate and maintain. We do have contracts with like Amtrak and then some of the other smaller railroads. Obviously, working with the big class ones are your CSX and CNs of the world. We do have some safety, worker safety and oversight responsibilities. Again, back to the grant administration piece, but again, much more of an oversight. A lot of the very direct oversight is still borne by FRA, Federal Rail Administration. A couple of slides on funding here just to give you a flavor, and this is extremely general, but you can see about half, a little bit more than half these days, does come from vehicle registration fees. The other half from gasoline and fuel taxes. Those are the user fees, if you will. There are a few other sources that have been added over the years, but kind of small pieces. That total amount, MTF, Michigan Transportation Fund, almost $4 billion, and then we take in about $1.7 billion in total for federal aid. And then that money is in turn split out largely by Act 51 that says, the trunk line gets 1.4 million, local roads get, 1.4 billion, and the local roads get about 2 billion. There is some funding in what's called our CTF, our Comprehensive Transportation Fund, that goes to our modes as well. And then according to Act 51, the split for federal aid for roads is 75-25 state highways to the locals. My last slide is just for your awareness. This is only the state trunk line system. This is only pavement. My bridge engineer is probably would be remiss that I didn't talk about bridges in here too, but this is a very simple graph. It hasn't looked a whole lot different than this for many years. We always strive to get to 90% good and fair. That's a goal that our State Transportation Commission provided more than 20 years ago. And we got there in about 2007, but it was about then that we realized that without long-term sustainable funding, that condition curve was going to fall off. Through the years, we've kind of been propped up a little bit. We had the American Recovery Act around 2008, 9, 10. We had some priority road investment programs in the state that helped. Obviously, we've had Rebuilding Michigan, which has been helpful for the roadways, the trunk lines in Michigan. But we've always kind of been projecting that without something long-term and sustainable, that we will be looking at a decline of the system. Again, this is just a very simple graph to see where we might be, 6, 7, 8 years from now from a trunk line pavement surface condition standpoint. Other than that, we extremely value public engagement and stakeholder engagement and outreach on our projects, but also on our entire program. We got some folks that are very active on social media to make sure that we're communicating as well with and with as many people as possible. And with that, I am complete and would be more than happy to take any questions that anybody has.
Well, thank you for that presentation, Director. We do have questions from members. We'll start with Representative Kunse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Weifrich, for coming today. Has MDOT done a study? What can we do to reduce costs? What have we done to save money? We're gonna talk about funding here shortly, and we're gonna increase that
Yep.
side.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know as though I've ever framed it as here's the cost savings. We look at it a lot in the terms of innovation. What new processes, what new materials, what new things can we try that are going to provide more value at the end of the day? So really a focus on innovation. We are very big on performance metrics as well, just making sure that we have a temperature on the what's important to us and where we're really tracking. I'll tell you, with the resources we have, it's difficult because we got a lot of competing priorities that we have to try to manage. But at the end of the day, we really think about it in terms of value for money and the efficiencies that'll ultimately provide the best value for our taxpayers' investments.
And if I may follow up very quickly, so we're looking at the lifetime of the project, not just the initial construction cost. But you have that information? You can show that we're maximizing that?
I can show you a lot of the innovations that we're doing, and I can show you what we're doing from an asset management standpoint. I mentioned the Asset Management Council earlier. I think all road agencies are trying to use data to drive a lot of the investments and make sure that when we're investing in a fix on a roadway, that it's going to maximize the life of that asset.
Great. Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Representative Carra.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Brad, for your testimony. I guess to that point, when we're awarding these contracts, you say you have a lot of other things that would, take up your prioritization of what you have to look at. And a performance base is an important thing to make sure that they are being cost effective, they're getting what they said they were going to, meeting specifications and standards. What makes you believe that the Department of Transportation would be better qualified than the private sector to determine the preventative care measures and the decisions to make sure that the costs are as limited as possible to determine the services provided?
Yeah, and I don't want to get in. Personally, don't want to get into a public-private discussion because we do have a very good relationship and work very well with our industry partners on a lot of these same issues. But at the end of the day, I think it's the department that really has the data and has the information that we need to help most effectively make those decisions. I will tell you, we do engage with our consulting partners. We just went through something called the National Best Practice Effort, where we had them go out and take a look at other states and see who was doing things that were innovative, not only from a project perspective or a material perspective, but a program perspective, and bring those back to us for our consideration. That process did validate that we're doing a lot of good things, and other states are probably going to model some of the things that we do. But we did bring some things back, especially on resource allocation and making sure that we're, with the resources we have, covering all bases. So I think we're in a position to kind of lead that, just because we're the owner of the asset, we have the data and historical knowledge and all of those other things. But at the end of the day, we certainly will partner with our private sector folks to make sure that we're not missing anything.
Thank you.
And just on that note, Director, can you describe the difference between design build versus low build?
Low bid.
Low bid, excuse
Yeah,
me.
So low bid literally is, here are the plans and the specifications. We do have a pre-qualification process, pre-qualified firms. They'll create their own teams with subs. They'll provide a bid. Typically happens first Friday of every month, and the low bidder gets the project. That's low bid, and I think most of our local partners use low bid on their contracts as well. Design build is a little bit different. We will take a project through its scoping, kind of preliminary phase, and we'll get it to about 30% design. At that point, we're going to hire a team that has both a designer and a builder. So a contractor that would normally bid our low bids, they'll team up with an engineering firm typically. They will take the project from 30%, finish the plans, and as part of their procurement, they will then present qualifications. Why is my team the most qualified to do it? It will also include a price component as well, so a piece of low bid, but there's also a piece of this qualifications based. We use this method when there's a really complex project, something that, probably could be done many ways, and we want to get the contractor input up front so that we have their ideas on innovation, on how they're going to be able to actually build it. We had this really crazy slope wall down in Allegan County years ago, and we used, actually that was CMGC, that was another process. But having the contractor sit with the designer while they're building the plans allows the plans to be developed with the efficiencies that the contractor can provide when they're actually building it. So that's essentially the difference between the two. There's a couple other ones that are a little more complex. Like I mentioned, construction manager, general contractor. It's similar to that, but a little, just a little bit more different, but probably not worth the detail to go into right now.
Do you see a difference in time to completion or cost between the two methods generally?
Not always. We probably can get things going with design build a little quicker. It's a tool in our toolbox, and I like to frame it with people that way. I'm not going to use a hammer to do a job I need to do a screwdriver, but when I need the screwdriver, I want to use that. Design build can be used to get work out more quickly. We don't have to have a full set of plans. We could actually work with the contractor as they're developing plans and do RFCs, release for construction. We could get parts of it going before everything is even completed. So there are some advantages there from a time standpoint. I will say it compresses a lot of the work that you need to do, which is fine. But again, it is a tool that we want to make sure, and we work with our contracting industry on this, we want to make sure that we're using the right tool for the right project with the right complexity.
Thank you for that explanation. We'll move on now to Representative Andrews.
Thank you, Chair. Has there been any work done to determine how increased investments in on the mass transit side, rail and busing, but also commercial shipping, rail and ports, reducing the strain on the highway system and the roads generally could play into something like this?
I'm sure there has been. I can't cite anything, I'm sorry, particularly off the top of my head. But one of the things, and I mentioned it earlier, I love to think of transportation as a system, and not just a system of state, local, and city roads, but also public transportation, freight movements, rail. All of these things have to work together, and we need to be looking at them holistically in order to maximize the investments that we're making. I think we can take that back, though, that question, and we'll get back with you on if there are very specific things and studies that have been done that show that.
I just think as we're looking at, road funding broadly, it's important to see where we can maximize our value across the system.
100% agree.
One last question from Representative Bruck.
Thank you, Chair. I get the last question. Oh, I'm just messing with
Just for now.
you. Okay,
Representative.
just for now. Okay. Well, I appreciate you being here. Thank you, Chair. Again, a couple couple of things to point out in Monroe. You have the state trunk line. You have Monroe County in blue. I believe we have opted out, and now you guys have your garages there. I do want to say the reason for that was because the reimbursement just wasn't enough for our county. As you know, we're the gateway community to Michigan. A lot of traffic. A lot of that commercial traffic you talk about goes straight south through our county, and I will say that your folks there are doing an incredible job. It allows our road commission to do their job, which is the local roads, much better, because we just couldn't handle all the state roads going through and the national roads going through our community. So I appreciate that. Our community appreciates that a lot too.
Thank you.
Your guys are doing fabulous work. On that note, being 75 is going to have some major construction there over the River Raisin.
Yep.
Certainly, I want to put in a plug to get the most robust rebuild on that bridge.
Absolutely.
So that is my ask, and we can certainly talk later as well. I know that's in the works, and I've had many meetings regarding that.
Great.
On the revenue side, you guys own quite a few miles of rail line, 600 some miles. You take care of marine transportation. You take care of aeronautics. Is there a revenue stream that comes in from those different things, like the aviation? Is there a revenue stream that MDOT gets in order to
Yeah.
do that mission, that job?
Yep, that'll probably be another presentation where we talk about our budget structure, but there is an aeronautics fund, and that's largely supported by sale of aviation fuel and sale of aviation, registrations, and a lot of the aviation sale related items will go back to our aeronautics fund.
And if 8% of the roads, which are the main trunk lines, have 80% of the commercial traffic and 53%, majority is on these main roads. So obviously there's definitely a desire and a need to have those in pristine condition as we can. Now, not to dig in the weeds too much, but you guys are also building bike paths and bike roads and things of that nature. Is there any revenue source coming in?
Yep.
I'm sure it's not a huge cost in MDOT, but
Yeah, and it's not a lot of money that comes in, but there's federal money through Transportation Alternatives Program and the Rec Trails Program very closely and try to maximize the use of those funds, not just putting bike paths along roadways, but also working with them where they could use them across the state as well. So there are certain funding sources for that, not very big, but in many communities, not all, in many communities, those are important projects that we can partner and work together on.
so probably percentage-wise, you're kind of the curator of those funds coming in to
Yeah.
enable that transportation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I appreciate it, sir. Thank you. Thank you,
bet.
Chair.
Director, I lied to you. We have two more questions that came in.
Keep 'em
For the
coming.
sake of time, I do ask the members to keep them brief. We'll start with Representative Preston.
Thank you. Sorry. Appreciate you being here. Quick question. What efficiency processes do you think, need reform? Protracted environmental reviews, permitting processes, dragging out that really drag out timelines, increase costs. Would you be a supporter of like a 12-month review permitting cap? I mean, it seems like a lot of these projects they get dragged out in the red tape of implementation. And then also your thoughts on rate of replacement. I've noticed a large amount of roads, especially up in the Upper Peninsula. Sometimes I'm seeing them completely resurfaced or redone, and I struggle to understand why to begin with. I've owned businesses with large parking lots. I understand asphalt. Yep. I understand crack sealing. And a lot of these roads that I see undergo a complete rebuild, I'm perplexed as to why it's even happening. So just efficiencies regarding rate of replacement on some of these, state highways.
Yeah, what was your first part of your question again?
Just regarding environmental reviews,
Oh,
permitting
review process. Yeah,
processes,
yeah, yeah.
just basically
Yeah.
reforms to the process to bring projects to fruition.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are very prescribed processes that we go through. The National Environmental Policy Act is kind of the federal act where we have to do environmental clearance on all projects. But then, obviously, we work with EGLE, we work with DNR and other entities on permits for our projects. We have standing meetings, speaking both with DNR and EGLE anyways, standing meetings where we get together and talk about common issues, and we try very hard to make sure that collectively, we're minimizing those timelines. I think sometimes those timelines might get dragged out because we might make a change on a project that needs to be reviewed. I think all of us would be open to streamlining. We just need to make sure that there's still the value in the review to get what the review is ultimately intended for. For our sake, we do a lot of permitting for driveway permits or people that are using the right-of-way. And 90% of what we're looking for is, can it be built safely, and will it be safe for operations in the future? So I'm all ears and willing to work with anybody, whether it's our federal partners or our state partners, on how we could do that. Speaking to your other, I'll be interested, maybe we can talk after about specifics. We try to use asset management principles. That means right fix, right time. We want to keep good roads good. So if we got a good road that's in good shape, we want to do crack seals. We want to do chip seals, minor things to it. Those are very low costs, and relatively low costs, I should say, and ultimately extend the life of those pavements. The longer we can put off a reconstruct, the better. Because once you go from preventive maintenance to rehabilitation, a little more expensive, and once you get to reconstruct, that's where the big dollars are. But yeah, if you have issues like you're saying, I'd like to know. The only thing that comes to mind is, was there a utility issue? Was there something else underneath that was driving the need for the reconstruction? I don't know. We try very hard to work with utilities and local agencies on dig once policies too. We want very much not to come and pave a road and then have somebody cut a square in it the next year.
All right. Well, Representative Wirtz has indicated that she's willing to save her question for another time.
Great.
With that, Director, we really appreciate your time. Thank you for your presentation. We look forward to having you come back and honing in on some of those items you mentioned. But in the meantime, that was a good overall presentation on who you guys are and what you guys do. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair. Thank you all.
Next up, we will be hearing testimony on House Bills 4180 to 4187. But first, we have a substitute for House Bill 4183 before the committee. This substitute would correct the inflation calculation to ensure it remains stable as time goes on. Representative Alexander makes a motion to adopt the sub. Will the clerk please call the roll?
To adopt the H1 sub to House Bill 4183, Chair Outman.
Yes.
Representatives Alexander,
Yes.
Carra,
Yes.
Bruck,
Yay.
Kunse,
Yes.
Nyer,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Bonan,
Yes.
Frisbie,
Yes.
Wirtz,
Yes.
Hersberg,
Pass.
Hope,
Pass.
Colazar,
No. Pass.
Andrews,
Pass.
Grant,
Pass.
Miller,
Pass.
Wilson.
Pass.
Mr. Chair, you have 10 yeas, 0 nays, 7 pass. The substitute is adopted.
The committee will now go at ease.
The House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure will come back to order. We're going to be hearing testimony on House Bills 4180 through 4187. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thank you for your testimony today. We'll start off with Chairman Outman to begin the testimony. Please proceed.
There we go. Well, thank you, Chair Alexander and fellow committee members, for the opportunity to speak before you today. For too long, Michiganders have endured deteriorating roads and empty promises. We've all seen the failing state of our infrastructure, and we hear about it constantly from our constituents. On top of that, we're staring down a road funding cliff that will only make things worse. The plan that we're presenting today tackles these challenges head-on without raising taxes and dedicates an additional $3 billion annually to fixing our roads, particularly the roads that people rely on every single day. Michigan families are already struggling with rising costs, yet some continue to push tax hikes as the only solution, and that's simply not true. The money is already there, we just need to start prioritizing it better. Instead of spending billions into corporate handouts and import projects, we should start prioritizing the needs of the people of Michigan better and safer roads. To get specific, my bill, House Bill 4187, redirects $2.2 billion in the corporate income tax revenue to road funding. That includes $600 million currently being wasted on pet projects and SOAR-funded corporate subsidies, handouts that have too often resulted in disappointing returns for taxpayers. Major corporations have received massive checks while Michigan families still dodge potholes. So I think it's time to start putting that money where it belongs. Under this plan, $2.2 billion from the corporate income tax would be distributed as follows: 10% to MDOT for state-managed roads, 50% to county road commissions, and 40% to cities and villages. This ensures that the funding goes where it's needed most, which is local roads that impact people's daily lives. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues to discuss the other key aspects of this plan.
My bill is regarding the Michigan business tax versus the corporate income tax, and I just want to go through some of the numbers with all of you. Michigan business tax is 4.95% plus 0.8% of gross receipts currently. That 0.8% of gross receipts typically will look at about an equilibrium to about 5 to 10% of an income tax. So that brings you up to a higher number than the 6% corporate income tax when you combine the gross receipts with the 4.95%. What my bill would do would ensure that businesses are on a lower level, uniform playing field, moving over these companies who have this privilege. It's about 9 companies, as far as I can see, who are still operating under the Michigan business tax. They then receive these mega credits. And the way that mega credit process works is they can take the personal income tax that their employees are paying, and instead of that going to the state, they can recapture that personal income tax, bringing the net pay from that company to less than what our small businesses are paying in the state of Michigan. So what we're looking to do with that bill is to take those resources and to utilize them to help, whether it's to fund roads or to fund overall government or to reduce the burden on the taxpayers, whatever we end up doing with it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and committee members, this road plan, as stated, it would be driveway to highway, and I think that's the important difference. As a county commissioner for the last 12 years and functioning as a road commissioner for those 12 years, I understand the issues and where we're at and how we've arrived here. We've managed ourselves into a crisis, and too often that leads to the state sticking their hand out and saying, we need more of your money. There's plenty of money in Lansing. We need to redirect it, as Representative Outman said, into prioritized spending and focused and highlighted by Rep. Carra. My plan would remove the sales tax from the pump and and reinstall in a second bill that will be talked about in a minute. But that would take every dime in tax collected at the state level to go into Act 51. So what we're trying to design here is not a one-time fix. What we're trying to design is a long-term, a short-term, and a medium-term. We're going to do the mass allocation for long-term to bring roads up to snuff, and we're going to fix Act 51 to support the funding that we need in the long-term and medium-term for maintenance. So it's a multi-faceted plan that meets goals and removes the crisis and keeps that crisis at bay for the long term. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. And I'm Donnie Steele, but I'm also the chair of the House Transportation Some Appropriations Committee. And the funding is very important for the posterity of our roads and the infrastructure for Michigan. So Per the reports and one of the testimonies today, we've heard that from MDOT that we need to increase our funding close to $3 billion annually just to keep our roads at a good level. And like our colleagues have stated, we can do this without raising our taxes. And we have to earmark these funds specifically into perpetuity because when we have surpluses like $9 billion, we don't spend it on road funding. So I'm very excited about this bill. It's 4180, and it's really great because it coincides with one of the governor's recommendation where it actually removes the sale tax from fuel beginning October 1st, 2025. And so the subsequent bills will show how it's reallocated. But just on my visual chart, for those who have seen this lovely chart of appropriations, basically it's taking it out of the sales tax of here, or the fuel tax goes into this bucket, and my bill removes it from here, and it just brings it down to here, which goes specifically into transportation. And my bill only removes it from this bucket so we can reallocate it specifically for roads. So I'm really excited about this, and I thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of this bill.
Outstanding. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for having us today. From this vantage point, it's easy to see why we are the best-looking committee. So well done on that. You're going to get tired of hearing us say revenue neutral. We're going to come up with $3.1 billion for road funding that is revenue neutral. And that's what this slide behind us represents. And if you forgive me, I'm going to turn and point at it. The wholesale cost of fuel, and then we add our federal tax to it, and then we add our state road tax on top of that. And then the really interesting piece is that the sales tax, the state of Michigan sales tax, is calculated on top of the state and federal road tax. We're paying sales tax on the road tax, a tax on a tax. And what we're proposing to do, the sales tax goes into the general fund. And what we're proposing to do, please, what we're proposing to do is to lower the sales tax through Representative Frisbee's bill and increase the gas tax. And let's not name names on who's going to do that. What the important thing to recognize here, please, is that these are the same numbers. There will not be a difference at the pump. There will not be an increase in revenue collected. People will not be burdened any further. This is a reallocation of existing taxes. So we're going to take sales tax, move it over to gas tax, so then it is allocated to road funding. We're trying to have MDOT, we ask MDOT for a 5-year plan, and it's very hard for them to do that on a 1-year budget. So that's what the crux of this is.
And just to put a bow on this, Mr. Chairman, this is $3.1 billion of reprioritization of our existing funds. We're not raising taxes, but we're not cutting any vital services to fund this plan. We're holding the school aid fund harmless, and we're prioritizing one of our biggest needs right now, which is our road and bridge system. So with that, we're happy to take any questions that the committee might have.
Very good. Thank you, the panel. And our first question comes from Representative Wirtz.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On that, Representative Kunse, that you just said, so obviously percentages, 6% changes based on whatever your base rate is. And a lot of this as well, some of these amounts are based on a percentage, right? So, but can you speak to that? So that, does that stay a 6%, or is it 6 cents on the dollar? Or how exactly we're basing the 6% on the current price of $2.38, but if our fuel drops, if we're drilling and we, drop $1, say a gallon at our wholesale cost, then how does that affect our budget here?
Correct. So we could do a couple of slides. So sales tax, we would add our $2.38, our federal tax of 18.4, and our current state tax of 31 cents. And the math escapes me. I don't have that in front of me. And then we would calculate sales tax. So if the wholesale price of gasoline were to drop to $2 a gallon, then our sales tax would drop accordingly. So yes, sales tax is absolutely based on the sale price of the gasoline. Fuel, I should say, because this also includes diesel, excuse me.
Okay, so what this proposal is just changing it to a flat rate of 45 cents, no
So,
longer a percentage.
correct,
Okay.
correct. And that's going to be based on the average price of gasoline, fuel again, excuse me, the average price of fuel, and that's what we're calculating. So right now, this is very complicated for a station because their price goes up and down and their calculations go up and down. And now what they're going to get is, here's the fuel tax for the year. You know, your wholesale price is going to go up and down, but you don't have to recalculate sales tax every time the price changes. So yes, it's going to go to a flat rate, adjusted for inflation.
Thank you. Representative Bruck.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative Wirtz, stealing my question. But just to clarify, so that price stays stable then? So it's stable revenue then for MDOT at the proposed level?
Well, it is, again, based on the amount of fuel sold. So it is calculated annually, but it will be, and again, that's our goal. The trend, we can project fairly accurately the fuel sold in 26 and 27 and 28. And, you know, I can't forecast the price of fuel, but we can come pretty close on what MDOT's revenue is going to be from this.
Yeah, it offers some stability.
That's the
essentially.
exact word. Yes, sir. Thank you.
And then one question regards to Representative Thompson's bill. The aeronautics, so there's a change in that from 3 cents to 8 cents. Does this goes to MDOT general funds, or would this be specific for the aeronautic division?
Thank you. Because Representative Steele's bill is making that sales tax exempt, my bill would actually make sure that the aeronautics department is still receiving revenue.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Preston.
Thank you, Chair. Representative Carra, kudos to you for the adjustment to the Michigan Business Tax Act as well as the corporate income tax. I think that kind of falls a little bit as far as into the murky area. If you could just explain a little bit more the consequences of this and how it's integrated into making this whole plan work. And then secondarily, Rep. Kunse, the 6% sales tax on fuel, being a former truck stop owner, the volatility that it ushers in on border communities where you're competing against states that do not have sales tax on their fuel. I commend you for that. It's something I advocated for over 12 years ago, and it's a great step forward. But Rep. Carra appreciated some expansion on that.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Preston. To clarify, there's the sales tax end, which they were talking about down there, about that 6% sales tax, not to be confused with the 6% corporate income tax number. So, again, what my bill would do is there are a few companies in Michigan who are still operating with a special agreement under the old Michigan business tax, and what they are paying is 4.95% income tax plus 0.8% of gross receipts. And then they're getting those mega credits where they are capturing back the personal income tax that their employees would be paying to the state. They're having that returned to their companies, so they're effectively paying less in taxes than other businesses, C corporations, who are paying the full 6% lower level uniform 6% tax rate. So this closes that loophole for those few companies, and with that funding source from having those businesses paying taxes like the other businesses in our community are paying, that will produce hundreds of millions of dollars, which will assist whether it's for funding the roads or reducing the burden on taxpayers. Hope that helps.
Representative Colazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation today. I think, Representative Kunse, this might be best directed to you because you referred to the slides behind you. On that first original slide, correct me if I'm wrong, but on the pay to the pump slide, public transit also comes out of the sales tax to about the tune of roughly $50 million, and I didn't see that in your calculations. I just want to make sure that that is indeed being factored in.
And I could speak to that. I mean, public transit is in fact losing some revenue from the sales tax elimination, but we're pumping over $1 billion into the regular PA 51 formula. They're actually going to make out better than they were previously. We want to make sure that we're not affecting public transit. We actually want to increase their bottom line if possible.
Okay, and my apologies, I wasn't sure who to refer to.
Yeah, no worries.
That's fine. And again, back to our convoluted PA 51, yes, they are going to lose some sales tax money, but because of the increase in the top of PA 51 that goes to the Comprehensive Transportation Fund, they'll be more than compensated.
Mr. Chair, if I may, can I ask one more question? Thank you. Oftentimes I hear from my local townships, as well as from we hear from the Michigan Township Association that they often feel that under the current formula, townships kind of get the short end of the stick. I know 50% of my district is townships. I think all of you represent townships. I'm just curious how you see townships kind of maybe getting a better deal out of this.
I could start off by saying that, again, when you're pumping, extremely significant increase into the transportation fund, that is going to benefit the townships in a tremendous amount because it's going to require a lot less of their general operating fund to go towards road construction projects and things like that. They are, under this plan, they are losing a little bit of revenue sharing, again, from the removal of the sales tax paid at the pump. Again, though, we're trying to make up for that by pumping a bunch of increased revenue into their general fund so that they can take on these projects. We're also looking at a couple of other avenues to maybe reduce the match requirement for when they are coordinating projects with their local county road departments. So we're playing with a couple of different ways to maximize their benefit, but point well taken. We do understand they are losing a little bit from that revenue sharing as well. And do you want to add on to that?
Can I add to that? I think the biggest issue for the townships is the match, as Chair Outman stated. It's that 50% match. It's from an unnamed source, but over 1,200 entities in Michigan have some type of local tax to meet that match. The areas that suffer the worst are the small rural townships because they just do not have a tax base that can raise any funds to provide any meaningful, long-term, sustainable rebuild of roads. And those are some of the roads that are in the worst shape in Michigan. So, and I'll give you an example. In Calhoun, where we did this, we've done over $270 million worth of local road projects on a match since 2014. But the small rural townships in Calhoun County that can only raise less than, maybe $50,000 on one mill, it doesn't go very far when it costs $1 million to be able to rebuild a road. And that's the point where many of these are. It's a rebuild. It's not a resurface. So at the cost of $1 million, it's going to take a lot. The other thing this would do is this plan with the $3.1 billion wouldn't go through the Act 51 distribution formula, and therefore we wouldn't require a match from the local townships. It would be everything is getting done with this $3 billion. Yep.
Yeah,
Representative.
If I could just
Go ahead.
One final thought
Sure.
on that question. We're pumping $2.5 billion into local roads. So I think townships are going to make out better than what they started. And there's a whole host of other things that I could say on that, but I just wanted to emphasize that point, that we are $2.5 billion of this plan goes right to local roads, whether it be counties, cities, and villages, or also our townships as well.
Representative Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about, we know that the corporate income tax has been used as a source of revenue for housing projects over the last few budget cycles. If that is removed, have you all thought about how we will address funding for housing?
The corporate income tax would not be removed. This is moving these few businesses who are still operating under the Michigan business tax over to the corporate income tax. It doesn't remove the corporate income tax.
Thank you. Maybe, can I clarify the
Well,
question?
could I clarify real quick, Representative? Because I think you're referring to the Community Housing Development Fund, which gets a $50 million earmark from the corporate income tax. And I will just say that, I think one of the biggest barriers to economic development is infrastructure, including housing. But on that point, though, on that note of the Community Housing Development Fund losing revenue, I'm still learning more about that fund and working with various stakeholder groups, trying to gather data just to see how effective this fund has been moving forward. It's relatively new. I don't think we've been using it except for since maybe 2021 or so. So I'm still working through that process right now because we know that that fund is beneficial for certain groups to try to leverage, private dollars to make these projects come to fruition. So we're still working through that process right now, and hopefully I'll have an update for you here soon.
Representative Andrews.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to jump back to the conversation about the local units really quick. I've got like 19 cities and townships and like half a dozen or so villages, most relatively small. My largest municipality is like 15,000 people. So I appreciate the discussion going on there. And as I'm thinking about this, I'm wondering, we're kind of like chasing a rising cost because of the constantly increasing cost of rebuilds. And to your point, Representative Frisbie, it's becoming kind of impossible for these small units of government to approach the rebuilds. And then on top of that, there's like an inefficiency built into this when every single little city and township and village is, doing their own bidding, has their own road department. Like we're paying redundant people and doing redundant studies on stretches of roads that, end at an artificial border and then start again at a new artificial border. Has there been any, as you've all been looking at this, has there been any attempt to look at how we can maybe approach some of those costs that are just being compounded on the front end from redundant permitting, redundant departments? Is there any way that we can, fuse a little bit of this together to reduce some of that redundancy, maybe bring the cost down a little bit, which then helps us, on the revenue side of things?
I believe Mr. Noyola spoke about that just briefly a couple of weeks ago. And yes, that's what we're trying to do. When, and forgive me, I'm drawing a blank, when one of your cities and one of your townships is doing a project, that's where the County Road Association tries to come in and said, let's work together on this. Because you're right, if I order 50 tons and the next one orders 50 tons, we're going to pay higher than if we order 100 tons and do one job. So without a doubt, we're trying to do that. We're not discussing right now superseding anything. So is St. Joseph in your district?
Yes.
So if the city of St. Joseph says, thank you very much, we're going to do our own thing, that is your decision. We would strongly encourage you to partner with the county and do that, but we're not going to mandate it.
Yeah. As a quick follow-up to that, I at least personally have a county that isn't very good at playing nice with the local governments that exist within it. I imagine others have the same experience. So I just want to sort of add that into the, the mix of this. It's nice when everybody works together, but a lot of times they don't, and all of these redundancies and inefficiencies get created in the process. So I guess encouraging everybody to take a look at that, because Michigan is a home rule state like we are. It's a kind of a unique problem that we face that a lot of other states don't. And it seems like something we really need to tackle if we're going to get this under control with cost ballooning.
Well, and excellent question, by the way, and great thought process, because I kind of have some similar concerns as well. One of my major overall concerns is artificially inflating the cost of all these road construction projects when we dump an influx of cash into the transportation fund. And that's why we're looking at various reforms to make sure that we do drive down costs, make sure that these projects don't just artfully inflate and then we get no added value. So I think that's going to be a much needed component of the conversation moving forward. What that reforms look like right now, I'm not sure. I'm still working with various stakeholders to find ways that we can drive down the cost of these projects, but point well taken.
Thank you.
We just briefly, may I, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Briefly.
We just briefly talked about the funding cliff. So the governor put some bonds out, and those mostly expire in 2026. So I'm optimistic that we can get this plan together. I do believe there is support across it, but this would go into effect October 1st. We might see some of these funds in next construction season in 26, which is about the time the bonding expires. So the motivation is there to avoid that cliff. So our construction people, MDOT, everyone is geared up now for this level of construction. I don't want to go back to 0 and then in 28 come back and go to, turn it to 11. So that's one of our focal points now is the timing is really good to do this.
Representative Wirtz.
Yeah, just follow up on some of the things you've said. So are townships and cities going to be required to use these funds annually, or could they possibly bank it, say, for a larger scale project? Can it be used on bridges or, say, additional drainage issues that they may be incurring? So can they kind of keep that and build on it?
Correct. Yes, they can bank it to an extent. This is not infinite. So we're not going to be receptive if they say, well, in 10 years we have a project. However, we understand that sometimes if Hillsdale has a large project, they may need to accumulate a few years of revenue to do that. And yes, that is going to be acceptable.
And my second part of that question then is, how do we ensure, so speaking of Hillsdale County has a situation on a road where they've been waiting over a year for Eagle to approve a tube. So how do we ensure that when this funding is approved, that our state departments are timely in responding and meeting the needs so that that money can be spent?
Yeah, that's a great question, but I don't think this committee can address the Eagle issue. Right. But we share your concern.
The committee will now go to ease.
The committee will now come to order. Now, I know there are a lot of people who want to speak, but just know that if you don't get a chance today, we're going to be taking up further testimony next week as well. I do have some cards to read in. Starting with Doug Needham from the Michigan Aggregates Association, supporting the bill and not wishing to speak. Not wishing to speak and supporting the bill, Rick Becker, Michigan Paving and Materials. Not wishing to speak and supporting the bill is Amanda Fisher, NFIB. Not wishing to speak and supporting the bill is Mark Griffin, Michigan Petroleum Association. Okay. Not wishing to speak and supporting bills 4180 through 83, and then 4185 and 4187. Grand Rapids Chamber. At all? Okay. Wishing to speak and supporting this bill is Lance Bianemi from MITA. Lance, do you want to come up and say a few words?
Afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak before you. My name is Lance Bianemi. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Michigan Infrastructure and Transportation Association, more commonly known as MITA. I'm here in strong support of the legislation in front of you today that will increase road funding by $3.1 billion annually. We believe that this is a huge step in the right direction in improving the quality of our roads and limiting the deterioration of them. And gets us much more closer to that 90% good and fair condition that the state has tried to achieve for decades now. Every study suggests that we need at least $3.9 billion annually for our roads and bridges to get to that 90% good and fair condition. As Representative Kunse and others have mentioned, we do come up to a revenue cliff starting in 2026. We have seen short-term investments over the past 5 years through a bonding program and through increased investments through Congress that all run out in 2026. And as we approach that funding cliff, we appreciate this opportunity to look at how we can increase revenues for our system. Some key components that were already mentioned earlier, but I want to make sure that we pay attention to because they are very important. We think that the funding problem or the policy problem that we have with sales tax on our motor fuel is the largest one we have in this debate. And these bills fix that to make sure what 82% of Michiganders want is that every tax dollar that we put into our pump goes back into maintaining our roads and bridges. Our public expects that, and these bills fix that. I think a lot of discussion has been on the local emphasis as well on these bills. As we've had these short-term investments, and it's already been mentioned, those investments have gone into our highway system. And so as the motoring public has been diverted away from construction zones to create a safety environment, they have traveled on those local roads and have beat up on those local roads without any increased investments over the past few years. So we're very encouraged that these bills actually put more emphasis on that local system as they're needed the most at this point. I'm here to tell you that the industry stands ready and willing and able to perform the work that is necessary for our infrastructure. As Representative Kunse mentioned earlier, we have already had that ramp up in short term, and as that funding cliff goes, this extra $3.1 billion is just adding a little bit more to where we've been over the last 5 years. Our members have ramped up significantly in their workforce and in their equipment purchases, in their sophistication to make sure that they can handle this work. There have been several examples that Director Weifrich used earlier of influxes of money that Michigan has received. The contracting community has overperformed each and every time. We stand willing to do that again today. I'd be happy to answer any questions on costs or the ability for the industry, anything that you have, Mr. Chairman, or members.
Members, do we have any questions for Lance?
You guys are easy.
One quick question for me, Lance, and you've already touched on this, but I just, again, and I expressed this a little bit in my testimony as well, can we ensure that project costs remain reasonable, with this influx of money coming in? I don't want to see projects go up an automatic 40% just because we dump $3.1 billion into our transportation fund. Can you walk us through that just a little bit?
Yeah, we certainly can't guarantee anything. I can't predict the global market and how things are going to react in the next several years, but I can say that construction costs have increased significantly over the past 5 to 10 years. We've already seen those increase in costs. We're not adding a ton of more material here. As I said, we are avoiding a funding cliff and only adding an additional about $1 billion. Our members have already ramped up to make sure that they can handle that amount of work. And so we don't see where costs would increase all that much.
Can you tell us what the cost would be if we didn't act now?
Yeah, certainly. That's a great point, and thank you. The cost of doing nothing and having our system continue to deteriorate far exceeds the cost of what inflation would be.
What would happen to the employees if you guys ramp down? Would they go to other states to work on construction projects?
Absolutely. So, and that's the biggest concern. And I think last week when I testified, that was some of the urgency that I had, is that our members' biggest concern is losing their employees. They've invested a lot of time and money and resources into their employees. And we're talking about a lot of families in Michigan. These are highly skilled, highly paid jobs that, if lost, these individuals and their families are not going to look for work in other industries. They are going to look for work in the same industry in other states where they are properly investing in their infrastructure.
Thank you for that response. And my big fear is that if we don't act now, the cost of what we'd have to do would far exceed what we're doing now. We'll move on real quick to a question from Representative Bruck.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Lance, for being here. Appreciate your input on these bills. My question kind of refers to an earlier question. With your organization, your members, when there's these barriers, say in a county, it was brought up earlier, there's townships, there's, these lines that are drawn. How does your organization work to try, is there something you can do to try to transcend those lines to get a more value-added project done versus, cutting off at those township or those municipality lines?
Yeah, our members certainly work with local jurisdictions to make sure that they're doing things as most efficiently and effectively as possible. Some of those areas you just can't really work through, as some counties, as mentioned earlier, don't really speak to other counties that are next to them. But we work as a contracting community as much as we can, working with the agencies and the owners of the infrastructure to make sure we're doing everything we can possibly do. And something to mention, in the 2015 package, there were requirements to set up the Michigan Infrastructure Council and also requirements on local units of government to communicate with each other on their assets to make sure they are coordinating. It's early, right? That was 2015, but communities are moving in that direction, and I think utilizing asset management to make sure that they are doing the proper fixes at the right time.
And as well with those local roads that have been destroyed, which I have plenty in my community I could highlight because of the closures to 75 and things. Are you advocating for those communities for those road fixes? Is there some way you guys are involved in that as well?
We don't make any of the decisions on where the fixes go, and so simply put, we just build stuff, that isn't something that we get involved in. We just get involved in once a project is determined of how to coordinate with that local community.
Okay, and lastly, in your opinion, would this be the best-looking committee that you've been to today?
Thank you, Representative.
Absolutely.
We're going to try to fit in one more person to testify. Lance, thank you for coming up and answering a few things. Wishing to speak neutral on the bill, Brad Williams from Detroit Regional Chamber. Brad, do you want to come up for a few minutes?
Mr. Chairman and members, thank you so much for having me. My name is Brad Williams with the Detroit Regional Chamber. Appreciate a few minutes of your time. For starters, I'd like to begin by expressing the Chamber's appreciation to the House and Speaker Hall for putting forward a plan that addresses one of Michigan's most pressing challenges, our transportation funding problem. This proposal is a significant step forward in the right direction, and we commend the House for its leadership in tackling this issue that continues to vex policymakers and frustrate all Michiganders. As you know, transportation is the lifeblood of our economy, and addressing the state's road and infrastructure needs is essential to maintaining Michigan's competitiveness and ensuring a high quality of life for our residents. We also applaud efforts to ensure all taxes paid at the pump go into the road system. The Chamber strongly believes that road users should pay for road construction, and this policy continues in that vein. At the Detroit Regional Chamber, business climate, economic development, and transportation, including public transit, are core to our mission. These issues are interconnected, and to build a thriving economy, we need policies that support all three. This plan in its current form brings us closer to a solution for solving our roads crisis, and there are still critical concerns that need to be addressed to ensure it does not inadvertently harm Michigan's business environment and fairness in infrastructure funding. One of the key concerns of the Chamber is the proposed removal of economic development incentives, including increasing the MBT to eliminate contractual mega contracts in addition to allowing the SOAR and site readiness programs to lapse. These incentives are vital tools that attract businesses to Michigan, foster job growth, and generate investment across the state. Removing these incentives would send the wrong signal to companies, both here and abroad, who are considering investing in Michigan. We cannot afford to cede this ground to neighboring states and nations targeting our signature industry and its family-supporting jobs for their own constituents and stakeholders. These incentives also help diversify our economy and ensure we become the best place to do business. The Chamber urges you to reconsider the removal of these programs as part of the broader transportation funding plan. We're also deeply concerned with the proposed corporate income tax increase, either to fund economic development programs or future road construction, as the governor has proposed. The Chamber believes that roads should be funded by the users of the system and not small businesses. Almost 90% of CIT payers are small businesses. Raising the corporate income tax in an already competitive economic environment will make Michigan less appealing to businesses, particularly due to the fact that it would make Michigan an outlier in the Midwest and across the country. Since 2020, 18 states have cut their corporate income tax and none have increased it. Finally, the Chamber has concerns with the spending formula in this package. While we recognize the importance of fixing our roads, the current formula was written in 1951, before the advent of the interstate highway system, before the building of the Mackinac Bridge, and while Detroit still had streetcars running up and down the city. The formula treats the increasingly potholed Merriman Road that leads to Detroit Metro Airport as if it had the same needs as the two-lane Van Horn Road just a few miles south. It distributes funds based on road miles instead of traffic volume or lane miles. This formula disproportionately impacts urban and suburban areas, which carry the bulk of Michigan's population and traffic and are left with insufficient resources to address their road needs. We believe it's time to rebalance the formula and ensure equitable funding across the state, especially for cities and local communities that face the highest levels of congestion and wear on our infrastructure. Taken together, removing economic development incentives, the potential increase in the corporate income tax, and the inequities of PA 51 in the PA 51 formula create a scenario where businesses, residents, and urban communities are unfairly burdened. As we continue to work towards a solution for Michigan's transportation funding, we must be mindful of the broader economic implications and the fairness of the proposals on the table. We urge you to make necessary adjustments to these provisions, ensuring that Michigan remains a competitive and attractive place for investment, and that all communities, rural and urban alike, receive fair and equitable access to the resources needed to improve and maintain their infrastructure. I appreciate your time and consideration. We look forward to continued conversations and making sure that a package moves forward.
Thank you for your testimony, Brad. We probably have time for one question. We'll go to Representative Kunse.
Thank you, sir, for coming. I couldn't agree with you more. I don't speak for the committee, but the corporate income tax is not part of our plan. I want to be very clear, again, revenue neutral. So the corporate income tax, I know that's been proposed. There's been a couple of funding mechanisms that have been proposed. Our plan is revenue neutral. So the corporate income tax was not discussed here today. That's not what we're looking at right now. I just want to be very clear where we're coming from.
I appreciate that, sir. I'm just responding to comments as to how we would fund economic development incentives going forward, which are absolutely critical to Michigan's competitiveness.
All right. Thank you for keeping it brief, Representative. We have time for one more. Representative Carra.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Brad, for your testimony. I was going to ask what made you think that the corporate income tax had increased, but for the fairness of the proposals on the table, we have small businesses who are paying a higher tax rate at the end of the day than these bigger businesses are paying. So if we want to have a fair and level playing field, doesn't it seem that a lower level uniform corporate income tax would make more sense so that we have equity throughout the state of Michigan than picking winners and losers through these certified credits for special privileged businesses?
I appreciate your question, Representative. And as you know, current mega contracts are a product of the Great Recession when manufacturers were hemorrhaging jobs by the thousand, and they were deciding which facilities would stay open and which facilities would stay closed. We believe it was critical at that time to ensure that particularly the auto industry consolidated within Michigan as opposed to moving to another state. I would add that businesses value certainty. And breaking contractual promises to homegrown companies will give pause to other companies who are looking to build jobs in Michigan. The impacts of these credits are have not only preserved jobs at OEM providers, but they've also preserved jobs at Tier 1, 2, and 3 suppliers across the state. Many Tier 2 and 3 suppliers in particular are family-owned small businesses, which would not have the opportunity to move with a OEM plant out of state. They'd more likely rather close up shop and eliminate all their jobs. Finally, I would say that the mega credits does not only result in decreased revenue for the companies who are still receiving mega credits. It also increases their overall tax burden, which is something that financial analysts across the country look to and advise their clients when making investments. So it has a long-term impact on the value of our companies as well.
Thank you, Brad. We're going to have to wrap it up now. We're running short on time. We did have two more people wishing to speak, John and Ron. I hope you can come back next week and testify. With that, there being no further business before the committee, we stand adjourned.